Hello, welcome. My name is Christina Stone Kaiser. I am cooking today from the How Not to Die Cookbook. This is a book written by Dr. Michael Greger. It's very whole plant based, and today we are making a red quinoa loaf with golden gravy. It's kind of a fancy little old school. You can see the quinoa loaf there with the gravy. In this plate being served with mashed potatoes and broccoli, which is actually how I'm going to do it today. And so the great thing about this book is he tends to combine a lot of nutritious ingredients in one recipe. Wonderful, wonderful way to kind of get all the stuff in that you need. This recipe in particular, I will warn you, it's labor intensive. I needed a rice cooker for my quinoa. I need a food processor for mixing things, and later with the gravy, I'm gonna need the blender. Plus I need 2 loaf pans because I'm making a double batch. And then I'm gonna have to make my side dishes. So tons of dishes, but like I said, really awesome food. So we're gonna get started. I have already in my food processor a large red onion, a cup of walnuts, and 2 garlics because I'm making a double batch, remember. So this is just going to get pulsed a little bit. So you're looking to get it kind of minced. You've kind of cut up the onion a little bit ahead of time so that it's not having to do all the work by itself. And you don't want it to be fully ground up because then you won't get that crunch, that satisfying crunch that's going to make your it's going to be like meatloaf, right? It's going to make that feel more hearty. So let's see. I need my spatula. Now, the actual directions would tell you to just keep adding to this food processor. However, I'm making a double batch. And what I have learned is that when you're making that, I can show you what I'm doing. When you're making that double batch, you kind of need to add in a separate bowl because otherwise it's not all going to fit. It's not going to keep mixing the ingredients. So I have to mix my ingredients in a separate bowl after the fact. So there's my first round of things that have gone into the food processor. I'm going to put this back on. And what's going to come next is the mushrooms and the beans. So again, I'm doing a double batch. So I have 2 cups of coarsely chopped mushrooms. He calls for quartered mushrooms. That kind of depends on the size of your mushrooms. And then the equivalent of 2 small cans of beans or 1 large can, red beans. So he suggests kidney beans. I have a small red bean here because I like it more. It's really up to you. So that goes in and we're going to pulse again. And that'll incorporate quite quickly. You may find that you need to move down the sides a bit. So for those of us who would like to just do one time and be done, and actually if you're making a single batch, it'll probably do it on its own. Again, I like to stress everything out with these double batches. But once I've got the food made, then I've got food for the next day. Everybody's getting a nutritious lunch. It just really works out for our family, at least in this season of life. Maybe I'll feel differently later. So some of my larger pieces I still need to push down. I don't want those to be quite so large, but most of it is in good shape, and I want to be careful that I don't overdo it. Okay, so I'm going to let this amount go into the bowl as well. And what I'll do at the end is I'll just mix it all together instead of it all mixing together in the bowl on the food processor. So, and actually just to tell you, I'm also going to bake this a little bit later because I make a lot of my food prep while nobody's here. And then later on, when I'm doing homework with the kids, I can just pop this in the oven. Or like when I'm about to pick up my husband. So, once again, this is going to go on the stand for the food processor. And then it says add remaining loaf ingredients, of which, let me just tell you, there's a billion. So, I have 2 cups of red quinoa and a cup of oatmeal. So, there's part of that. And then here's the rest of my quinoa. You can start to see why there's no way I could have done this all in one. Then there's some wet ingredients. So I have 4 tablespoons of peanut butter. You could also use tahini. And 2 tablespoons of miso. Remember, double batch again. So that's going to go in. And then I have a whole mess of things. 4 tablespoons of nutritional yeast. 4 tablespoons of flax. That's going to kind of keep things ground together. And then a bunch of seasonings. So it's 2 tablespoons of parsley, 2 tablespoons of miso, 2 teaspoons of paprika, a teaspoon of thyme, a teaspoon of sage, a teaspoon of basil, and a 4th teaspoon of pepper. So tons of stuff. Again, I'm going to give that a pulse. Because technically that maybe could have gone just right in. But I kind of want my oats to pulse up a little bit. And I kind of like those spices distributed ahead of time. Look how much power. This poor cutting board's like, ah! So, this part can come over as well. And be mindful of the blade. Mind the blade, dear. And so all of that goes in. And you see we've got a lot going there. And so now I'm going to I'll start with the spatula, but I might just skip to my hands at some point here to really get this blended in. But I can kind of use the back of that spatula to push down and around. But I don't know, like with meatloaf, I'll probably just use my hands. It's easier, it's faster, I can kind of get in there. So if you really feel like, no, I can't get my hands dirty. Honestly, I understand. I feel you. So the goal here is to get this in a nice combined state, similar again to meatloaf. And I anticipate that this will be really flavorful. I kind of can't wait. I've done black bean burgers, and I like them, but it's a similar process. At least from his book, I've done the black bean burgers and liked them. I don't always like the recipes available to me, but it's a similar process, so I need a little bit of time. And the thing here, instead of making individual patties, I'm going to make big loaves. And so I prepped, actually you can see right there, it calls for some parchment paper on the bottom. I'm not sure. I actually wanted to use a glass pan and just put a silicone mat on the bottom. But since this is my first time making the recipe, I kind of want to see just how sticky does it get, how well does it bake. A lot of this ingredients doesn't need a ton of baking time. So he calls for 350 in the oven, 50 to 60 minutes, but check at 40 minutes. So he calls for this to be covered with foil on the top if it gets too brown. So you can see that's nice and mixed up at this point. Looks like, ground whatever. And so essentially when I'm making a double batch, I just want to get this good and even, and then I'll really just separate it and stick the two, see, like so. So they're roughly half. And then I can take one and dump those ingredients in. I just hate using parchment paper. I know that's like a really big thing these days. But I hate throwing it away, and I hate cutting it and making it perfect. So if I can use a silicone mat in the future, I would much rather do that. But I'll do it this first time. And sometimes when you're baking like muffins or whatever, if it called for parchment paper, I would trust them. Like, you've tested this recipe, I will believe you if you say that's what it needs. So just to tell you though, this smells really good. I've never used red quinoa before, so I'm pretty excited about it. And again, because you need that protein, something that's just giving you, for instance, grains, like maybe it would be just quinoa and oats, you're not going to feel as satisfied. But also the fats that you can find in the tahini or the peanut butter is going to also be helpful. So there's a loaf, and it comes probably 1.5 inches up the side. And then I can form the other one. But also, you know, remember your mushrooms and your onion are actually vegetables, right? And then the flaxseed has a ton of really great properties for those who are trying to follow a whole plant-based diet. I think the recommendation on the whole plant diet is a tablespoon of flaxseed per day and a 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric per day. So, I mean, you could get that in a smoothie, but I don't always want to make a smoothie. I think it's the hard part for me is, especially in the winter months and when we're running out the door, I don't want to run out with a coffee mug and a smoothie mug. I'm just such a princess. So, I actually really prefer more like bars in the winter time, something that doesn't make me colder. And then I like smoothies in the summer. So it is what it is, but you could get the flax and the turmeric while you're making a smoothie. So there is loaf 2, and those will be ready to go. So if you want to just join me at the sink for a moment, I'm going to come on over and rinse my hands off. So I'll kind of start my dishes pile. It's inevitable that there's going to be dishes with this one, and I just kind of have to live with that. It's fine. My hands are clear. I can move this over as well, and then we'll just come back and we'll reset. So ideally, if you were doing this all at once, you would put that in the oven and then make your gravy. But I'm going to actually just make my gravy, and then I will deal with the oven part later. So this I'm going to put away to give us a little better workspace. And then I can also clear out some of these prep dishes as well. We're so close. Almost ready. So now we've got the blender, which needs to get involved. And just to tell you, so he recommends that you start in a saucepan with your broth and your garlic. I'm not going to. My blender is a high-speed blender, which I am told can handle creating a liquid soup. It can make it hot. So I'm not gonna go use that other part. I'm just gonna start at the blender. So he calls for a 1/3 cup of vegetable broth. And I actually, I don't make a homemade broth these days. I have a vegetable soup base. So I have 2/3 cups because I'm doing a double batch of water. And then in here, I have 2 tablespoons of miso and like a teaspoon of this vegetable base. So let me actually get my spatula, not full of the other, at least kind of not full of it. So I'm going to stick that in there. And I'm going to stick the garlic in. So it calls for 2 cloves of garlic. So I've got 4 because I'm doing that double batch. And I'm just going to let that run around a little bit for getting that garlic mixed up a bit. So I'm assuming part of why they want to put the garlic in the saucepan is to get it warm. But you're going to put it in the saucepan when all the ingredients are mixed together. We're going to do, if you were doing a single batch, it would be a small can or 1.5 cups of chickpeas. So I have a large can of chickpeas. They're drained and rinsed. And then a load of spices. So 4 tablespoons of nutritional yeast, a 1/2 teaspoon of turmeric, 2 teaspoons of thyme, a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. I think that's everything in there. Yeah. So I'm going to put those in, and that's going to actually just get those chickpeas all smooth. made a decision because it seemed to me that was a really thick sauce. If I want this to be a gravy and, I don't know, not a pate, I needed more water. So I added 2/3 cup more water, just so you know. And so this then is going to go, it's pretty thick as it is, by the way. You can see how thick that is. So this is going to go into the saucepan and get heated up as a gravy. And, you know, it's sort of like ketchup, if you will, but not. And you're getting more protein because of those chickpeas. The same with the nutritional yeast. Nutritional yeast is really pretty good for you. So I'm just working to get as much of it out of the container as possible. And then once I've heated this, you know, I can reheat it later and allow it to be ready when I'm ready. So I'm pretty excited. And honestly, like with the garlic and the thyme, it's going to be super flavorful. I've almost gotten as much of it as I can. So that will be in the bottom there. And that's really the bulk of the work for this. So this I'm just going to let heat a little bit so that the flavors combine. And then later on, I'll let a little bit. And actually, to be quite honest, we'll probably add a little bit water still so that it really does behave like gravy. So let me start with 1/3 cup. And I'll just kind of mix it around, because I do want it to ladle like gravy and not plop. If I serve my kids a plop, they're going to revolt, I can tell you that. So that easily moves around. It'll look a little shiny. And then you could kind of mess with that to your taste, whatever feels comfortable to you. I think I would probably go a little bit more even. So now I'm at 1.33 cups extra water, just if you're keeping track and you wanted to replicate for yourself. But, you know, your chickpeas might behave differently. You never know. So do feel free. And when you first add water in, it'll look like, oh my gosh, I added too much sometimes, because it's all still pooled on top. So do add small amounts at a time until you get the consistency you want. But before making a decision about whether or not it's where you want it, make sure you've incorporated it. There, it's starting to go a little more slidey and not ploppy. So I'm happy with that. So those are the two components. And then later on, I'll have 2 pots going while the one is in the oven. And I'll boil potatoes in one, smash them up, and I'll steam broccoli in the other, and that will be the meal. So enjoy. Hopefully that will be fun for you too, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.